You felt it this morning. A scratchy throat, maybe a headache. So you reached into your medicine cabinet, grabbed a pill, swallowed it with water, and moved on with your day. You didn't even think twice. But that pill, that one small white tablet, contains something your ancestors would have literally killed for. And the story of how humans survived sickness before that pill existed is stranger, darker, and more remarkable than anything they teach in school. Getting sick 50,000 years ago wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a death sentence unless your tribe did something about it. And what they did will change the way you see medicine forever. Let's start with something that should be impossible. In 2017, researchers excavating a burial site in Shanidar cave in northern Iraq made a discovery that changed what we know about Neanderthals, our ancient human relatives who lived in Europe and Asia until about 40,000 years ago. They found the remains of a man who had lived to around 40 to 50 years old, which is pretty old by Neanderthal standards. But what shocked scientists wasn't his age, it was the state of his bones. His right arm had been amputated. He was partially blind. He had severe arthritis throughout his spine and joints. He could not have hunted. He could not have gathered food. By every measure of survival, he should have died decades before he did. His tribe fed him, cared for him, and protected him for years. People caring for each other is the oldest evidence of healthcare on Earth. Caring for the sick didn't start with hospitals. It started around a fire 60,000 years ago. But care wasn't the only weapon they had. They had plants. The evidence is written in the archaeological record. Ötzi the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old mummy found frozen in the Alps, was carrying a medical kit when he died. Inside it were 2 pieces of birch polypore mushrooms strung on a leather cord. For years, scientists didn't understand why. Then they analyzed the mushrooms. Birch polypore contains compounds with antibiotic and anti-inflammatory properties. Ötzi also had intestinal parasites, and the mushroom he carried has been shown in modern studies to have antiparasitic effects. He wasn't carrying them as decoration, he was treating himself. But Ötzi is only 5,300 years old. The relationship between humans and medicinal plants goes back much, much further. Archaeologists studying Neanderthal ancient dental plaque found traces of plants with no nutritional value at a site called El Cedrón in Spain. Among them were yarrow and chamomile, both of which have documented medicinal properties. The Neanderthals weren't eating them for calories, they were eating them because they worked. This was at least 50,000 years ago. And then there's willow bark. Humans have been chewing willow bark for at least 3,500 years, as documented in ancient Egyptian medical papyri. The active compound in willow bark is salicin, which your body converts into salicylic acid. In 1897, chemists at Bayer synthesized a stable version of that compound and called it aspirin. The pill in your medicine cabinet is the same core molecule your ancestors pulled off a tree. Now here's where it gets darker. When plants weren't enough, ancient humans went further, much further. In 2018, researchers studying a Neolithic skull found in Spain made a discovery that shocked the medical world. The skull, which was around 5,000 years old, had been cut open, not by an injury, but by a human hand with a stone tool. Crucially, it showed signs of bone healing, meaning the person survived. This practice is called trepanation. It's the oldest known surgical procedure in human history, and it has been found on every inhabited continent. Skulls with deliberately cut holes, some healed, some not, have been found in Peru, France, Russia, China, and across Africa. The oldest examples are over 7,000 years old. What were they treating? Researchers believe it was used for severe headaches, seizures, mental illness, skull fractures, anything that seemed to involve the head. The idea that pressure or an affliction inside the skull was causing the problem and that cutting it open might release it was ancient humans reverse engineering a physical issue they couldn't fully see. And the survival rate was not negligible. Studies of Neolithic trepan skulls suggest that somewhere between 50% and 90% of patients survived, based on the bone regrowth visible around the edges of the cuts. These weren't botched attempts, they were practiced procedures passed down through generations. But there was someone in charge of all of this, someone who knew which plants to use, how to perform a surgical cut, and when to do which: the shaman. In virtually every hunter-gatherer society that anthropologists have ever studied, there is a single figure who sits at the intersection of medicine and community survival. The shaman, healer, or medicine man was the most critical specialist in the group. Where a hunter's knowledge kept the tribe fed for a week, the shaman's knowledge could keep them alive for a generation. A 2011 study published in PLOS I analyzed grave sites from the Natufian culture in the Levant, dating back roughly 12,000 years. One burial stood out, the body of a woman in her 40s. Buried with her were the remains of over 50 tortoise shells, parts of an eagle, a leopard, a wild boar, a cow, and a human foot. The researchers concluded she was almost certainly a shaman. The most carefully buried person at the site was the healer. These people weren't just mixing herbs, they were the living memory of their community. They carried the accumulated medical knowledge of dozens of generations passed down through practice, story, and ritual. Lose the shaman and the tribe lost its entire medical library in a single death. And then there was fever. Modern medicine spent decades trying to suppress fevers aggressively with ice baths and heavy medication to drive temperatures down immediately. It turns out that approach was often flawed. A fever isn't your body malfunctioning, it's your immune system turning up the heat to kill pathogens that struggle to survive above normal body temperatures. Ancient humans understood this intuitively, even without the scientific vocabulary. Ethnographic studies of historical hunter-gatherer groups show a consistent pattern. When someone develops a fever, they are kept warm near the fire rather than cooled down. Their bodies are allowed to burn off the infection. Only in the last century did we discover the immunological mechanism that explains why that instinct was right all along. Your ancestors didn't have germ theory, but 300,000 years of surviving infection taught them what worked. The knowledge was coded not in textbooks, but in behavior and cultural practice. Here's what makes all of this quietly devastating. Researchers estimate that roughly 25% to 50% of children in ancient hunter-gatherer societies died before reaching adulthood, mostly from infection and disease.